It is 2020 in Urbana, Illinois, and you have been involved with an activism thing with the geese. You want to tell us about the geese thing? I want to know about this.
Okay, I will try to keep it short.
I wouldn't ask if I wanted it short.
Okay. I think of myself as a composer in not a musical way, but as a person who tries to make something happen that wouldn't happen without her. And I look at people that way too, which is that person has the potential to make something happen that hadn't happened before, and probably only they could do it. So I do not identify necessarily with calling myself an animal rights activist.
Okay.
My small house is in the Park District and by the bird sanctuary. So a lot of my neighbors have been these Canada geese, these very proud, family-loving, honking away, and really quiet. They're quiet. And even though we probably had a resident community of maybe 170, when they'd all be sitting at night sleeping, they're very quiet, and they murmur. They take good care of their kids, little goslings. So I have found that more and more I've grown really interested in the non-communication between humans and animals. And if I were at a party and I saw a goose under the table versus a professor by the food, I would go to the goose under the table and try to figure out, kind of like a new music piece, how I could learn what it's saying and how we could share a space together. So I don't know whether it's an extension of my training in experimental music that I now really am interested in animals. I now feed around 8 wild animals. I hope that's legal. Raccoons and possums and badgers at my house every night. I've been doing this for about 3 years.
There are badgers over there too?
Yep, just
Whoa.
small. And they all do really well. Nobody hurts each other. And I have a cat. And I won't miss the dinner. People say, what do you do at 8 o'clock that you rush over? I got to get home and make dinner, you know. And it's really for these animals and watching them and watching how we get friendly. So a mishap suddenly happened in May that we learned that in 4 days there was going to be a vote from the Urbana Council whether they wanted to cull, which is a euphemism for kill, all of the geese in the park. And a friend of mine called me and she said, this is stupid and horrible. And I agreed, and through the 6 weeks we had to try to save their lives, and we didn't, a whole group of people that I didn't know got together. There's the strangest people. Suddenly a physics professor was weeping over the geese, and so we sort of found ourselves through being in love with animals. And I really think it has a lot to do with being in love and caring for something, just really. And people who love something really shouldn't be treated badly. And unfortunately, we were.
Oh, whoa.
Not only were the geese, was there a decision unanimous, because the Board of Commissioners is basically one opinion divided amongst 5 very sleepy, inert people. But it was unanimous to kill the geese, but it was also repelling any input from the community. The talk of we want public input. And apparently we learned that this is a style, particularly with killing animals, where the people in power recognize that there's a good deal of reckless sentiment against killing animals, where people can't quite get why they so much don't like this. And so they do it in the middle of the night. They allow a very short time period for public input, so there was 10 days. We collected 2,000 signatures saying we did not want the geese killed. They collected 800, and yet their 800 apparently mattered more than ours. You're given 2 minutes per person for community input. You barely can say who you are, and you're told, that's it. And I felt like they were trying to show us the adult way of not caring and make not caring infectious. And this group of people that I've been working with for 10, now there are 10 of us, since May 10th, people really respect that each other cares. We don't say, why do you care about a geese? The backdrop of all this also is that at the same time, there has been this horrible flare-up of racism and brutality and police brutality and justifications. And similarly, as I hear, city councils here, they make the pretense of we want public input, but they listen and then they don't change their minds anyway. And that was the same position that we were in. So yet, many people felt we're trying to compare the being in love with an animal and wanting to protect it and wanting to protect yourself loving it. And wondered why were we concentrating on animals when humans were being brutalized.
Right, and that, so you actually had some demonstrations across the street in a very public space, because there's, Crystal Lake Park, and then there's this shopping mall and the bank and the, and this was in March, right? So
no, it was it was actually the beginning of May, starting on May 12th.
Oh, that's right, because everybody was out wearing masks.
Yeah, and they were killed on June 22nd, yeah.
Okay. And I know that you had at least one protester across from you handing out this thing saying, we shouldn't be caring about the geese because we actually have to care about war and we have to care about Black Lives Matter and what does the geese matter to the community?
Yeah.
And they stood out there too, so.
Yeah, and there were people that, the language doesn't budge easily. The language puts up a wall and says, you're a one-issue person, you're an animal rights person, that's all you care about, or you are a human rights person, that's all you care about. And I saw so many people trying to figure out the connecting sentences. Right. Because, like I said, for me, it's all having to do with caring and wanting to be pursuing what you care for and care about. And I definitely came out to the Black Lives Matter. That was hugely important. And yet, I found the people that would start to cry when they heard that the geese were going to be killed. And a huge amount of African Americans would go, what are you talking about? And we say, they're going to kill these geese. No, they can't do that.
Right.
Are you guys speaking up?
Right.
Thank you, ma'am. I got to work, but thank you. They were thanking us.
Yep.
And we didn't make that up. I think had we had the whole town against us, we would have just thought we're weirdos. So we did all sorts of things to learn how to turn what was otherwise deliberately a flattened terrain. All decisions had been made, okay? March 14th, May 14th, everybody voted in the city council, the Urbana Park districts to kill the geese. It was unanimous. It was supposed to be over.
Yep.
Done. There was a few articles in the News Gazette that people kept answering the wrong question. They kept asking themselves, do I like geese? And answering no. But that wasn't the question. The question was, if there were too many geese, then there's ways to deal with overpopulation in a humane way and ways to deal with overpopulation in an inhumane way. And that's what we were asking people. But the Park District was deliberately turning the discourse into, their survey was, do you like geese? Do you find them friendly? Do you like the poop? I'm thinking, this has got nothing to do. And as I have researched it, in 1874 in the United States, the Humane Society of the United States started. And my grandmother tells the story. She's Italian, that when she grew up in southern Italy, she was given the job to take care of the little animals. And she loved it except, she said, when the cat had too many kittens and her mother told her to drown the kittens. Mm-hmm. And she said that she never forgot that anguish. And then she came when she was 20 to the United States, to Chicago, and married my grandfather, another Italian. And he said, no, non è qui, it's not here. He said, aquí, non si merde, we don't kill them here. We have adoption. And she said she fell in love with the United States because we don't have to drown kittens anymore. And the Park District was telling us, you have to drown kittens. And acting as though we were a bunch of sentimental idiots because we loved something and they didn't. So we are asking for their resignation. I don't want parks, sanctuary spaces to be run by people who do not care and are trying to teach you. Because they were trying to say to us, oh, Susan, come on. I mean, if you have mosquitoes, do you refuse to kill them? And I thought, what an analogy, a mosquito and a Canada geese. And all this, oh, come on, you have to be realistic, ecologically scientific, treating us as though we were women. And we are women. Most of us were women in this group, but not muddle-headed. So we are now, well, actually, I will keep it sort of, we have a couple of plans under wraps.
Okay.
We're trying to create a geese group called FOG, Friends of Geese. And we will have a memorial at the end of September with a huge geese garden happening in my house across from the park, and various other things. So we're trying to go, as I say, from being agitators to educators, trying to open programs that would show people how to treat geese. Because even 2 days ago when we were at, I'm going to forget, Williams, one of the schools on Washington,
Okay.
we had a protest there because the park district was handing out what they call boredom busters, which were these big sacks of toys and candy.
Yep.
And we were simply saying, had you kept the geese in the park, there would have been some reason to go to the park. Instead, you have to put together chocolate and sugar and crappy toys. So we were out there going, you killed the geese! You killed. And after they left and we were hanging around, someone came by and said, we used to have geese in this park. I said, really? Yep. About 30 of them. 2 weeks ago, they come and took them away.
Wow.
So it's not over. There's probably like 1,000 geese in the Champaign County area. And more people feel like there's just too many geese, they have to do something, and the solution is to kill them. And that's what we're going to work on. We're going to give people another solution, and they're going to see that it's worked in other places.
So you mentioned the survey that they put out, and surveys should actually ask people what their opinions are.
Yeah.
But yet this one was, I would say, very, very extremely leading. Like, don't you hate the geese? Please
Exactly.
say that you hate the geese.
Yes.
What
When
do
you
think
see a
about the
geese
poop?
honking at you, when you walk in their poop, there wasn't a single, do you enjoy the presence of the geese,
Right.
which is what we were
Do you
discovering.
try to drive down the street and they walk across, do they make you late for work, or, things like that. It was,
Were they noisy? Yeah, that was all this. Yeah, and it was discouraging. We learned that they had never counted the geese because we asked them what constitutes overpopulation and what constitutes population, and they said, just a feeling we get that there's too many geese. I said, so for your feeling, you're going to slaughter these geese. I said, but how many geese are there? And Derek Lieber and Tim Bartlett looked at each other and said, we don't know. I said, but how can you be using numbers if you haven't counted? And they said to me, well, how many geese are there, Susan? And I said, but I don't know. That's not my job. Yeah, so there was a dismaying lack of what I would have assumed. This is a very well-paid park district. It gets a huge amount of our property taxes.
Support.
It's the third amount.
and support from the community as well.
And support. And you would have thought that they would have reasoned more carefully. But as we have demanded hundreds of pages of FOIAs, as your husband knows. So we're going back into the conversations they emailed with each other in terms of finding out how they managed to do a terrible thing but look good.
Okay. So I'm going to,
let's switch.
since you mentioned FOIAs, I'm going to ask you, I am learning about FOIAs. What did you learn about doing a Freedom of Information Act request through all this?
Well, one thing is how administrations make you melt from the boredom of bureaucracy.
Okay.
So if you ask for a FOIA like we did, saying we want the conversations that you've had on the subject of geese starting in 2017 to 2020 and ending up with 1,200 documents, that was a mistake. We shouldn't have asked for such a big question because now we're busy, looking through hundreds of pages. And so that's one thing, how to limit the scope.
Yeah, but you don't even know how
No.
to, what would be important when they started the conversations.
Right,
So
right,
how do
right.
you even choose 2017 and
Yes.
2020?
Yeah, that's
So-
some of the things. But however, it's really amazing to see, particularly with emails, how much people can leave a paper trail of things where it's clear that they were up to some things, warning each other not to ever give numbers or figures. If they were claiming that employees had gotten sick from the poop, when we asked them the name, they said, no, personal disclosure, meaning they had probably never gotten sick from the poop, but they were hiding. So they were advising each other how to get away with all of this.
And I think one of the suggestions that you had was, if there's a lot of poop and there are people looking for jobs, why don't we have people pick up the poop? Go around and picking up the poop because nobody can work right now, and it's an outdoor job, and it's
Yeah, well, I was talking about having goose herds.
yeah.
That was a little
Okay.
bit my hybrid idea. I thought, why don't we train people from age 15 to 20 how to handle animals as a
Yeah.
well-paid job
Right.
If geese are bothering people, they can just call on their cell phone and get the goose herd, and the guy would come right over and say, "Oh, Agatha, I told you not to do that on your..."
Exactly.
And it would become a community enjoyable thing. And maybe the goose herd would be dressed up with their big goose hats, and, you know, and also people didn't learn that they shouldn't be feeding the geese. It makes them poop more, and it makes them sick. A lot of kids loved feeding the geese. That was a whole project of education. It would have been fun to try it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and okay, so they also called it
Charity harvest.
a charity harvest.
Yeah.
You want to talk about what charity did the harvest go to?
Yes. Okay, so this is actually a program of the USDA, which, you know, that is a Republican-appointed position. And I first got to know the USDA in my panic of hearing about the geese going to be killed. I thought there must be friendly organizations. And I called up the USDA, got this guy who's the head of it. I don't know how I got the head. And I said, oh, they're going to be killing the geese. They're going to be poisoning them and then killing them for meat. I said, what can we do? And the guy said, nothing. He said, that's a perfectly good thing to do with the geese. And I thought, this is the USDA. Mm-hmm. That attitude I thought was really interesting. So it's a program which is using language in order to hoodwink people into thinking charity and harvest. Who can argue against harvest and who can argue against charity? Sounds so sweet. This is one of the things that we're majorly foiling on, without getting into details because we don't want to arm our opponents very well. But it turns out that we called up almost all the shelters and food pantries in Illinois. It was one of our friends spent a week on that, and asked if they had been approached by the USDA for geese meat and would they accept it. And except for one, 99% of these groups went, what? How are you going to kill those geese? And the USDA says, they round them up, they gas them. So everybody was aware that to be trying to give poor people poisoned, gassed meat was a contradiction, if not an absolute conflict. When you try to talk to the USDA or the IDNSR, they're very cagey about how they answer. So now we FOIA'd those informations, and we have the guy who's the head of the Board of Commissioners, Michael Walker, says that, no, we would never agree to such a thing. Mm-hmm. Same time, Tim Bartlett on June 22nd, News Gazette said, no, it totally went fine, and it's now in the hands of the USDA. Can you indict people for conflicting viewpoints? I don't know. We actually don't know. If a public official lies, is that any reason to try to have him step down? I'm not sure what all of this is, particularly right now in Trump's America.
Right. And I'm just gonna, I have a degree in animal science, and if you build it to where it's really attractive to geese, then geese will come. And there are definitely ways that they could have made it less attractive to geese, as, you know, just a higher bank.
Right.
Higher grasses
Long
nearby.
grasses, yes.
And less landing and less perfect, you know, nursery area for and stuff like that. And they, by making it more sterile, more safe for people, they also made it the perfect environment for geese. And if you build it for geese, which they did, I mean, it feels that way to the geese. It's like, this is the best nursery ever.
Yeah.
Then they're going to stay there. So, okay. So the other thing that I was going to, so they also lied to you. Well, okay, let's go to the News Gazette.
Okay.
So how did you find the other people that were going to be activists in this? To, you know, is Urbana different than other places in being able to find people who care about things? What about the local media? We have one newspaper now. Years ago, there was the Courier.
Yeah.
And in between, there have been little tiny newspapers, and of course, there's the Public Eye. But now there's also an online newspaper too. And you did get some media coverage. And what do you think about the News Gazette's coverage of activists topics, leftist topics, anything?
Yeah. How we how I found people was I have like 160-person email of in-town people whom I've worked with and things, and they somehow tolerate my assorted emails saying, help, we need an audience for this, and gee, we need to eat basil over here, and things like that. So I emailed a lot of people with a very brief message and a picture of geese. But then I also, the day that the Board of Commissioners voted unanimously to kill the geese, I just broadcasted to my group that we were going to have a protest and to meet right outside there where the geese were always meeting by the park. And this is what is amazing with this town. You can actually get what you want. A lot of towns, you try to do this and you get stopped. You try to make a theater that does this and they won't let you. You hold a book on Kant, nobody shows up to the book reading. This town, people show up. And it is, so be careful what you wish for. It's like, I did want to make this play on Immanuel Kant and 20 people showed up and they wanted to. I just find that wonderful because I'm from Chicago, I went to DePaul, I went to Northwestern, I then went to Rome in order to write music for the Rome Orchestra. And I was all the time looking for something I was reading about in these books on composers, that there'd be salons, there'd be people who would stay up to midnight talking, listening to music. And my whole life was, up to coming here when I was 24, was looking for these people. Where were the people that stayed up and talked and had ideas and could suddenly play the piano? And when I came here fresh from Rome, and everybody in 1974 was wearing blue jeans, and I was all dressed up with lots of makeup, because that's how you look like when you're from Rome, Italy. I thought, I'm not going to stay here. This is a bunch of farmers in this town. They don't know how to dress. But they did know how to talk and how to join in and say, yeah, Susan, come on, we're going out for some coffee, and I'll introduce you. And people were so friendly. And also, this is 1974, Vietnam, were passionate about the systems that were ruling us. And I came from an Italian-American family where if things were bad, it was your fault, the Catholic guilt thing. And when I initially came here, I just couldn't understand why were they indicting the system? What was the problem? What was the system? I had no clue. You know, the people in Vietnam were wrong, the Americans were right, or maybe it was the other way. It was so bewildering to me because it was a mixture of the kindest, most inclusive people I'd ever met and this language about politics. I'd always known people who had disdain for anything political. So through the years of being here and getting my feet wet with saying, I'm going to try this. Will anybody come? And people came. And I didn't have money to give them, and I didn't have status to convey. It would be like, I'm making a 2-hour play on the politics of the adjective political. Will you be the main character? So lo and behold, I was not surprised when I called this rally, and 35 people showed up for the geese. It was, and I knew maybe 6 of them. And there was we didn't know what we were doing. All we knew was that the death sentence was on the geese, and it was just a matter of days or weeks. It turned out to be 5 weeks before they were going to be murdered. But there were these people. And I had a big geese hat and my accordion. We kept social distance. That was the other thing. People were conscious that 2 blocks away there were rallies later on in the day for Black Lives Matter, for defunding the police. Some of us were going to them. So from this group of chaotic beginnings, we all spent a lot of time trying to get people's names and addresses, having meetings. The group of the 10 of us that pretty much converged with each other would talk every morning on some kind of Zoom for our strategies of what to do. We were trying to learn what to do. We didn't know what to do. Making it, because what the Park District kept saying is, it's all done, thank you very much. Next. It's all done, thank you very much. Next. And we had to say, it's not done, it's not next, we're next. These geese are still here. So the idea of keeping it in public opinion's purvey and thus using the media became really important. somewhere along the line in the News Gazette, and I'm afraid too many people think this way, they felt they were pulling one side and then pulling the other side. So they talked about taking sides. This article takes the pro-geese side. This article takes the blah. And I kept saying, it's not that we're for the geese. We're for humane, non-killing methods. It's like, keep getting the... But that's part of the thing that power does. It makes you think about a stupid issue instead of what the real issue was. But I found my colleagues with the geese group were wonderful writers. And that, to be with articulate people where they're writing, I would look at it and go, yes. And my heart would be strong again, thinking, this is why we're doing this. This is why we're doing it. And so that enabled us, and even now we are still writing about the geese. We have another story, and it's going to be accepted in the News Gazette on Tuesday, I think. So it becomes, and it's also a need to educate people about why do we care. I want to write an article saying, are we silly geese to think about the geese? Are we silly to be thinking about geese? I think of myself as a climate change activist. So this idea of not just thinking whether geese are good for us or the park is good for us, but are we good for the geese and are we good for the park? That second part of the equation of not always thinking that things are there for our pleasure, and otherwise, we just justify fracking and kneeing and pipelining things. If it's good for the human, it goes, and just some humans. So for me, this is a kind of a continuation of thinking in terms of the road we travel with other living species, not always human, right now.
Yeah, and the way that powers that be manipulate the rest of us. Yeah. So you mentioned a lot of things. You mentioned playing the accordion.
Yes.
You mentioned being a climate change activist. You mentioned coming here in 1974. You mentioned what you were looking for in the way of a salon type conversation. But there's also a lot of, I want to know about the School for Designing a Society, everything you want to tell me about that. Herbert Brune, the costume closet down we're at the Independent Media Center, the Urbana-Champaign Independent Media Center in Urbana, and what you remember from the Ray Street place and this place, because we were talking earlier about some of that stuff. But I want to know, let's start with the costume closet first of all.
Okay.
So you also do theater besides doing music? Music composition?
Yeah, my degree and Mark's degree is in music composition. And this school is pretty clear that if you're a composer, that doesn't mean being an arranger of West Side Story. It means to make something happen in music that hadn't been there before. So it's an experiment-oriented school, which was really good.
Is that what drew you here?
What drew me was what I wanted to escape from in Chicago.
Okay.
I came back from Italy. I was supporting myself doing cocktail piano.
Oh, wow.
1974, yes. My father, an Italian, would show up at the back of the cocktail lounge and just watch me and the men around me, and he was right.
Yeah.
And I knew that this was a terrible place for me to be in with patriarchal father. So at that time, it was easy. If you had a teacher, my teacher at Northwestern, called up somebody here at the U of I and said, yeah, she's decent, let her in. So I didn't have to take admission from her. That was how things happened then. Yeah, a lot of things happened like this. But so when I got here, though, it was still, is this an environment where I could compose music? Being in Italy had shaken my confidence in my ability to understand what it meant to be a composer, because people would speak about composition in these vague ways of talking about inspiration and hearing music in your head. I never heard music in my head, and I don't think I was ever inspired.
I haven't either. So I was like, everybody talks about music in their heads. I'm like, what?
Yeah, right. And they get very misty-eyed about it. And so when I came here, I was still looking for this group of people. And I met people first via these political discussions that were raging and how upset people were with the war, with the consequences. And then I also signed up, it was fall semester, for a class called Seminar for Experimental Composition. I thought it was somebody else. I thought there was this interesting looking professor, but it turned out to be Herbert Brun.
Who was not interesting looking, is that what you're saying?
No, he wasn't the one the other one looked like a mystic. He had twinkles in his eye.
Yeah.
Ed London was his name. And I thought, oh, that might be fun to take a class with him. Through that class, I mean, Herbert had been a survivor of the Holocaust, though his family had not survived at all. And he had never, the Nazis had not let Jewish children continue and go on to high school. So he only went to 8th grade. He didn't really know how to be a university professor. He knew how to argue and discuss legitimately. And he would tell students, "You speak like a Nazi!" And they'd go,
Oh my
he
gosh.
didn't know that in liberal America, you say things like, "Well, that's very interesting." So he would, we were trying to figure out all sorts of questions about the justifications of war or not, the power, the beginning understanding of systems and things. And he kept pointing out the language that was leading people to make decisions. He maintained that the press was what enabled the Holocaust to happen. And it wasn't necessarily hatred. It was the fact of selling newspapers became a way to inflame issues.
I think he's right.
Oh, he was way ahead of his time. And so when he would talk, and he made people very conscious of what they said, he would go, "Now that word, is it your own opinion? What if you didn't own your opinion?" And the person would be like, but he made people really aware of how they spoke, which was his work against the Holocaust. And he was also, as many Germans were, totally bewildered that the country, Germany, which is the country of Goethe and Schiller and Beethoven and wonderful poetry, and that they could have done that, what they did. And I think he spent the rest of his life trying to understand it, trying to talk back to it. Why was his parents and his cousins, why were they all killed in the Holocaust? He had the triple problem, or double problem, which was that when he got out in 1936 and went to Palestine, the Zionist program, his parents, who were good middle-class Jews, believed the propaganda that it was the Jewish troublemakers that were being pulled off into the work camps.
Oh, it's not.
Yeah, and they kept writing him back saying, "It's fine, it's no problem here, it's a little strict, but we have many friends in the police," and things like that. And then somewhere in 1942, he got a message saying that they had been taken in the middle of the night. His complete cousins, everybody. And Herbert said he never told anybody for that year, because everyone else also in Palestine had a story of things like that. So he was always aware of those people that were kind of apologists for brutality, and who felt that their education or the fact that his father was an engineer, that they hadn't been practicing Jews for generations, would enable them to get out, or to stay and
be
be
safe.
Yeah. So he brought that terror to his classes. In the meantime, we would be listening to experimental music or Beethoven, or trying to make a connection between Vietnam and the Second Symphony of Beethoven. How do you do that? And I never knew until I met Herbert and his wife Marianne and the group of people around him that music is ideas. There's ideas in music. There's proposals. There's things you can think about. I think we as women, I was always told I thought too much.
What?
Yeah, people would always say, guys, particularly when they were trying to make you do something, they go, "You think too much, just relax, just make your mind blank." I'm like, "Oh no, I don't think I'm going to." But I was always told I thought too much, until I later on got really nasty and said, "Yeah, well, you think too little, buddy."
Good for you.
And putting thinking down as though it's a cold, unreasoning, or irrational thing. And the way Herbert and Monty and these people thought, and the way they talked articulately about, and would, talk about a floor in a poetic way, raising the consciousness of language and how we were creating temporary realities for each other when we spoke. It was it was wonderful. And I fell in love with this town because of that. And I never wanted to leave, and I didn't want any of my friends to leave. I spent a lot of time cooking up events, like we did a 9-month tour of Europe, just in order to convince my friends to come back to Champaign.
Oh, wow.
Do not move on and be a professor in Michigan. Please stay here. I haven't done very well, but we've tried to get a lot of people to come here because it's been it's been really a good place for me. And then I think, well, if it's good for me, it's probably good for other people. So with Herbert, we were already trying to do music concerts that were mixed with theater and political questions and similarity in their frictions, all sorts of strange ways of thinking about ideas. That group turned into a performance ensemble, and then the performance ensemble turned into a school. Okay. This was over like a 20-year time period. Because as the 80s went by, we started hearing more and more that schools were no longer expected to be places where you change the world through changing your thinking, but were expected to be places where you learned how to do well and be at the top of the world as it was.
Wow, right.
And that was, I mean,
Wow.
we would call up Oberlin every year, and initially Oberlin was a crazy, wild school in the 80s. And then we started to hear things like they were taking away health care from the teachers. I remember somebody asking us if they could come and work for us. It was like, this was a professor at Oberlin, and you know, we were earning like $100 per concert for 10 of us.
Wow.
And then it became clear that education was in trouble. It was in trouble. It was teaching people to accept the hierarchy and use education to be at the top of what other hierarchy, rather than thinking this is stupid system hierarchy, let's work on it. So somewhere around 1990, we just had come back from Germany. We were there the year that the wall came down.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Yeah, it was cool, but also very sad because
yeah.
the Eastern Germans did not want to lose East Germany. They just wanted to not drive a Trabunka. They wanted an Osterizer, and there was another third thing. Oh, to travel. They wanted to travel. They were tired of waiting.
Right.
As happens even in Cuba, where the children of the revolutionaries go, what's, you know, hey, where's the good times now? So it was really hard to be there. We had also composed programs, theater programs, where we learned them in German. So we talked about healthcare in the United States. But compared to what was going on in Germany with, you know, at first they were giving people 20 mark on the weekend to come into West Germany, and then they were giving them free lemons. Whenever you see a German with a lemon, you knew they were an Eastern German because they had cut off the connection to Cuba and fresh fruit. And then from that, they started talking about a unified Germany. Herbert was with us at that time, and he freaked out because that's what he had heard from the Nazis. It was the same
Gotcha. Unified.
rhetoric.
Yeah.
Ein Deutscher verbunden. So it was a strange, you know, we just felt like what we were wanting to talk about, healthcare in the United States, was irrelevant to what was going on there. But we came back to this country, and we started to try to get a way of being an ensemble that could travel all amongst the classes and teach people how to make plays instead of thesis papers on what they were learning. And that was really fun, but we couldn't find anybody to accept us. So then we thought we would start our own school.
Okay.
And for us, it simply meant we were doing things that we thought were legitimately educational, and we were going to call that our school. We were terrified of thinking we had to have a secretary and a board of directors, so we just decided not to have any of that. Not to have a secretary, so that means one of us ends up being the secretary all the time.
Right. It still has to be done.
Yeah, it still has to be done. Yeah, but we didn't want to solidify the hierarchy in there. And in the 90s, there was still a lot of people who would be happy not to go for their third year to college, but to come to our school. They liked the weirdness of what we were trying to do, because we cooked breakfasts and lunches and spent a lot of time talking with people about what they wanted the system to be like, and that was important. As the years through the 90s went by, so we were doing the schools as summer schools until 1997. And that's when we decided to open up a school here. This leads into the beginnings of the IMC.
It sure does.
Is that okay?
Yeah, please do.
Right.
I'm like, I hear Danielle and no, Kate. I hear everybody coming because you're talking about, now the school starts to stop.
So
moving.
our program was, our image of ourselves was that we were a performance ensemble. And we had a broken down big old van that could seat 10 of us. And about...
When did Patch get involved? Just curious.
Patch got involved in 1987, where we had a cybernetics conference on our audacious constructions. And somebody told us about a doctor who was trying to build a free hospital where the well-being of the staff was as important as the well-being of the patients, where initial patient interviews were 4 hours long, and all sorts of weird stuff. And here this guy came looking like a throwback to hippie land, long hair and flapping clothes. And he was a regular doctor, but he could also recite from memory 4 or 5 hours of poetry.
Wow.
And I remember thinking, huh? A doctor can do two things? He was already a hybrid person.
Already a hybrid.
Yeah,
Wow.
and he was talking about his land in West Virginia, and part of me thought he was lying. And part of me thought, well, could be. So that summer, after we met him, me and a few of the people in our ensemble took the van and went to West Virginia. And it was, as he said,
Wow.
he didn't have the hospital built yet, but he had 320 acres and some buildings, wonderfully friendly hippies that would talk late into the night about ideas.
There you go.
And so we went back to Champaign, and then we got another car, 2 more cars, and now 15 of us drove all we were people, and everybody fell in love with his group, Gazoonis, the Gazoon-type people.
Mm-hmm.
They were all medical professionals with degrees, only they weren't stuffy, they didn't charge money, they would really look at you and go, you got something there. They loved the arts, and so there we were. So our 2 groups were joined because of the concern about changing things for the better.
Oh, wow.
The skills they had were medical, the skills we had were theater and music. But that bond, that bond of dedicating your life, not to money or stuff like that, but to really working with people and making the world somehow better was at the base of, now it's 33 years later, and the groups are really close. Pash still doesn't have his hospital, but so many things have happened, one of which was this movie of his life, but mostly this idea of introducing play as a part of what could be considered medical. And this is important, particularly in times where so many people hang on to a medical diagnosis of themselves, a pathology on bipolar. So trying to break that pharmaceutical connection to misery and introduce play and fun as being actually good for you and good for the world.
Wow.
So when we came back here in the 90s from Germany, and then we were traveling a lot, and what that meant is we would go away for 3 weeks or so and come back here for 1 week. We would do residencies in different schools.
Oh, I see. Kind of like Alan Hall does their artist in residence.
Right, and it was a lonely thing because when we came back, people didn't know we'd really been gone, and you'd be like, and I started dreaming of what if we would just do the school here and have people from town, and I think the question of space kept coming up again and again. In 1997, when we really decided, a lot because of Herbert. Herbert was, at that time, in his late 70s and had severe emphysema. And so for him to travel with us, which we loved, and he loved too, it was really hard on him. And we had some near scrapes with him almost dying. It was like, ugh. So we wanted to stay home where he would be comfortable. And he could work and teach and have fun and all that kind of stuff. So in the year of 1997, from 1998, we tried to figure out a school which would not have preset classes. We met with all sorts of people in town who all wanted to be teachers. Danielle Chenoweth, who you will meet soon, came back breathless to our group meeting saying, I think I got us a building. It's like, we don't need a building. No, it's a little house. They were going to demolish it tomorrow, but we can have it for $300 a month. I was like,
oh, wow.
Okay, and we all and of course we fell in love with this little building, and then we're imagining gardens and all this kind of stuff. So
is it the house on Franklin then, or
no? That was the house on Ray Street. That's now demolished, but it was it was okay. We could, and part of me was always thinking, is this what hippies have done this? Because I loved the hippies. It was they were cool. They didn't seem to belong to any generation. They were always part of the system, but against the system. And so the thought that we would have our own little house and we could do stuff inside.
Wow.
House.
A kitchen.
And stuff like that. So that was where Danielle popped her head. She's always been looking for places. She's a placemaker. So is really good.
But there's a lot of controversy around that always too.
Yes.
But
yeah.
And those are important as well.
Those are important things. Yeah.
You found. Oh, that's.
So we
cool.
found the place. That was and then we started the school in 1998. We had a bunch of people from New College in Sarasota, Florida. This was a college that we went back every year to have a residency. So we knew the students really well.
Oh, okay.
One of which was Danielle. The other was Kate McDowell, Meadow Jones. Actually, I think Kate went to New College, but I think Meadow was from this town that they all came from. And then there was a person named Justin. So We had 4 or
What was
5.
Justin's last
Justin
name?
Smith.
Oh,
He
you
was the
mentioned that,
son
yeah.
of somebody that we had all done political work with, and she had said, "Take my son. I don't know what he's doing, but just let him do something." So he stayed there, and that was 1998. We're sort of heading towards 1999 December when the Battle of Seattle happened, which is really that combination of things led to the IMC. So the combination of things were that in the spring of 1999, we started having a lot of, Mark remembers this differently, but people started talking about WTO, the World Trade Organization. And we didn't like it, we were like, huh?
Right.
Because we had indicted capitalism and the United States, but the idea that there was a bigger structure than capitalism and the United States was like, well, how could that be? And hearing what the programs were, that the people were, these poor countries were being given these loans, but on the condition of basically destroying the social networks that they had built and turning them into basically consumers and workers and no longer producers. So I remember looking around and thinking, wow, there's about 30 people in this room. Because we were just trying to teach each other. And again, this is a town where you can say we're going to be talking about the World Trade Organization on Saturday. Everybody knew that meant no money. It meant food, probably available. It meant seeing people. Hi, blah, blah, blah. And it meant analyzing. It's like, what the fuck? So we educated ourselves. And into that scenario came the idea that, and Mark says, and he's right, that the Battle of Seattle people organized this way back, probably in 1998. But it came for the invitation to come to Seattle. And somebody said, let's do it. And everybody was like, huh? And so we simply did it. We had a fundraiser by means of performance.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, we gave a performance with dinner. It was dinner theater. And we raised like $15,000. It was like,
wow.
well, because in this town, as Danielle puts it, and I do too, people have more time. No, they have more money than they have time. If they're an academic, they've got money, but they don't have time.
Right.
And later on, when we saw how easy it was to raise the first big chunk of cash for this place, it came from Danielle's realization, because she told me, Susan, we thought we were going to raise like $4,000. We raised $40,000. Because people wouldn't just give 100, they'd give 500 or 1,000.
Wow.
And it's something, it is one of the characteristics of this town, that there is more money than there is time. There's people who...
But I think they also care about something deeply.
Yes.
And they're waiting for something, for someone else to have the time to do the right thing and to do the mission that they would like the world to change.
Yes.
And
and when I was talking to you earlier about how when we were protesting the pending killing of the geese, the people would roll down their windows and say, what's going on? Why would they do that? And we'd say, they're poop, they're messy. I'm glad you're here. You speak out for me. Now, I can't do that now because I got to work. I got 3 kids. But you do that. You tell them I don't want that. And people, I don't know what that is, but that way of thinking, you're grateful that somebody is doing that. Yeah. And you will give them that $5 or whatever, just say thank you. Yeah. And people, that is an emotion that we don't talk much about. But I noticed it in this town. People do care deeply. And they don't have the skills or the chutzpah or whatever it is to organize the whole thing. Because what I discover is people are concerned about stuff, but we have a real paucity of organizers. The ability to go from realizing there's a problem and there's something we could do, and then what? Most people go, I don't know. I just see that. I see so many people saying, Susan, could you? And I go, no, why don't you do it? I don't know. I've never organized it.
Right, and people don't know.
They don't know, but they know enough to still care. And so we got that fourth, I don't know what it was, but it enabled us to send 18 people on the airplane from Chicago to Seattle.
They flew. That's right. Mark was telling me that they flew, and I had forgotten that.
Yeah, so, and it was, people drove to Chicago and then went. And people were practicing. I didn't go. I stayed with Herbert because his health was not so good.
Herbert was, he was, okay.
And we were watching it. Okay. And that was the other part, is that, the thing got progressively more violent as it happened, those 5 days.
And I'm just going to say, was it the protesters that were violent, or was it the police that were violent?
It was the response of the police. The first day, and it was probably all a strategy. They were just nice as pie. And we were, phoning everybody, going, "How are you guys? What's happening?" Blah. sort of forgot to say something, that somewhere around 1998, people rented the first IMC building.
Okay.
Okay. And the growing of technology, and I think probably Danielle will speak much better about this, because she always has been this hybrid person. She's been really good high tech. Probably one of the reasons she gets hired in these, organizational radio structures, things. And she brings this absolute passion for social change and for arts. But it is not trivial that the IMC, Independent Media Center, has aligned itself with technology and the hopes of technology. So somewhere, you have to understand, when people went in December of 1999 to the Battle of Seattle, I don't think people had cell phones then. And I don't think we have lived through 20 years of people going rapidly through, everybody has a camcorder, everybody does this and that, blah, blah, blah. And then at some point, the IMC was even behind the times because everyone had their own, people were borrowing technology.
Yep.
And then the next year came and it was cheap enough at Walmart that you didn't need to borrow. So it was like, wait, we got all these little recording things and people weren't taking care of them, they weren't bringing them back and all that stuff. But the people that went to the WTO in Seattle did not go with the plethora of media.
Okay.
People went with signs and costumes and things like that. But that was exactly the weird thing that happened. I remember on Wednesday, maybe we were talking to Mark or something on the phone, and he said, "Did you hear about what happened yesterday?" It was like, no, there's no news on what had been happening.
Right.
He said, "Oh my God," he said, "they just," and then he described the rising brutality, the attempts by Code Pink, successful attempts, to go in there and to seize the microphone for a half an hour. I'm forgetting the name of the woman who did it, Medea Benjamin.
Oh, Medea.
They were able to get in there through all this vast police, media. And that was like, yes, that was so good. But then things really escalated, and there was, the bombs, the kind of bombs that, your eyes burn, all that kind of stuff. Tear gas, a couple of our students were pushed into the prison, jail. So the whole thing went from initially being organized in terms of these pies. So everybody was given a section of the city where you'd get like 2 blocks that you could do anything you wanted in there, save violence, which was a brilliant move. So rather than worry about consensus and I don't agree with you and I don't want people to take their clothes off, people just said, that's their thing. And then they had this kind of pie circle at night where each member of a group would come and represent what was happening. So it was a really, such an improvement over consensus-based decision-making, which for me is, just because of the time it takes, is a really bad idea. But
Fair enough.
But what was shocking people was that they weren't getting any of the media. There was a complete blackout. And it was like, okay, all this is happening, and it's happening to our friends. And people were scared. They couldn't find, the people in our group were losing each other. It was like, they heard somebody was in the hospital. Many of these were our students. We were 50. They were 19.
Wow.
It's like, we're not, I think Mark stayed an extra week because Laura Anderson, I think, was in the jail, and we just had to get her out. She was 19, I think, at that time. And I just thought, oh, I'm going to lose her now. But that awareness that the media was not going to show this was such a brutality, because all along, now we're used to it, but we hadn't been used to it. What we had, during the 70s and 80s was the media right there. I mean, they slanted everything, but they showed the bodies in the body pit. I think the Persian Gulf War was the one time where they decided they weren't going to show the bodies. Yep. And they weren't going to talk about the people that got killed. That way of just, like the Park District, it's fine, we're moving on, that kind of thing. So that was shocking to everybody. And I think the impetus, and somewhere Danielle, working with Sasha and a few other people, they hunkered down. This post office was going to be sold to somebody or demolished or something. And I remember Danielle saying to me, this is probably 2003, Susan, we bought it. And I was like, uh-oh, we got like $400,000 worth of debt, Danielle, what are we gonna do?
Yep, we have a mortgage? What?
But they were so counting on an image of this place being arts, politics, and media technology. I've said about the media, the whole digitization is the belief that if you send messages really quickly and you can send it to a lot of people, then you have power. And I've often said, but there's very little interest in what the messages are actually saying. You don't care about the quality of the message. You care about the speed of the message and the amount of people it can get to. And I think this place has been trying to care about the quality of the message because of the concern for social justice. It's not just blah. It's like, okay, what are we saying? What are we doing? Can I say one thing? Okay.
Please.
When the thing in 2003, one of the fantastic blurbs that the IMC had was, "Don't hate the media, become the media."
Mm-hmm.
I was like, yes, that is so smart. And that was the time when people were borrowing, where we were having, in there, that place was a hubbub of trying to teach people how to do radio. We didn't have a radio station
Yep.
yet. We didn't have the towers, but people were learning how to, do all sorts of stuff with the media. At some point, and I think this was probably somewhere around 2007 or 2006, I remember being in the Illini Union in the computer room, and some college person saying, "Hey, Joe," and the other one go, "What?" "There's this really cool radio station. It's at this place they call the IMB or something like that. Anyway, there are really cool people over there." And I thought, yes.
Finally.
These are just, and it became popular doing radio. But I think in the meantime, the inundation with purchasing the media on people's own, I'm a little puzzled by this. It just looked like this place ceased to have that critical edge of being the one place where you could be the media, because people were already being the media with their cell phones. They were.
Yep. Okay.
I tell this story about, I have my facts all mixed up, but at some point there was a young student from the Middle East who the FBI decided to deport. And we were told they were going to show up. It was like 3 blocks from my house. Some of us were awake from like 4 in the morning. We were told it's early in the morning. Then we got the signal that they were arrived and we're going to just seize this person, put him in prison. And so we had a phone tree, blah, blah, blah. These are all IMC people. And I remember seeing like 25 people all behind the lens of their, whatever they were doing, and me saying, no, kick him, stop him, because the big old FBI people were like lumbering over there, and nobody was stopping them. Everybody was recording them.
Right.
And that was when I had the brilliant idea of telling the lady who was the parking police who came by. I said, "They're kidnapping a student." And she got all upset. She got the police involved, and then they spent about 45 minutes because they couldn't figure out whether somebody coming from the immigration blah, blah, blah was in higher situation than somebody from the Champaign Urbana police. And so we sort of stopped them. But part of me was thinking, what is everybody doing behind these cameras? It just seemed like we had camera-ified, we had selfie-ified protest. And that was my perspective, mostly because I didn't know how to use them and I was more interested in kicking them and doing stuff like that.
So you have a violent streak in. No, I know.
I like it.